a retired homicide detective. I've interviewed thousands of people, from serial killers to ministers. Welcome to the interview room. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the interview room on this special edition of Saturday evening, just before the great holidays are upon us. Some of you have been celebrating already in Hanukkah, and we wish you a very, very safe and wonderful season. Also, Merry Christmas to everybody, and any other folks out there that are celebrating something special. We wish you also the best of love and peace throughout this season. As well, we want to thank, obviously, our subs, our members, and our Patreon members for being with us here on the interview room. We're so grateful to each and every one of you, and without you, this show would not be possible. So we are so grateful. As always, a big thank you to Miss Sophia, Mimi J2, Maui Girl, and Teresa M. Thank you, ladies, for all that you do. And a quick update on Miss Sophia. She is doing much better. We talked with her husband. She's making great progress and improving. So thank you for all of your prayers and well wishes. But let's please keep her in our prayers as we go forward for a speedy recovery. As well as this show tonight is dedicated to Kaylee, Maddie, Xana, and Ethan. Dr. Brucato and I are very sensitive to the fact that this is the second year, the second Christmas that they will not be with their family. And so tonight's show, we want to continue to be sensitive and keeping in mind that everything that we talk about here is just our opinion through, a professional experience in relationship to the psychology of things and, of course, an investigative homicide position as well from where I've come from. With that, we want to thank Dr. Brucato for coming back this evening. Of course, there is nobody comparable to him. He is literally the author of not only does he study violent thoughts and actions, emergence in psychotic and non-psychotic persons, but he is the author of this wonderful Christmas gift. And if it can't get into your inbox fast enough, the new Evo is definitely on the way. So please take care of your friends and families and order them a copy as well and send it to them. Dr. Brucato is the co-author of the Columbia University Mass Murder Database, which is the largest in the world. Over 119 years of data, Gary?
Yes.
Yep. And he's the co-author of The New Evil, Understanding the Emergence of Modern Violent Crime. There's a link to Gary's book in the description below, as well as he sees patients on a regular basis in his clinical work at his office in Manhattan, New York. So tonight, Dr. Brucato and I had a long discussion about what we talked about last Sunday in relationship to the house, but we also want to talk about. So we've got two prongs we're going to talk about tonight. One, we're going to do a deep dive into accused killer Bryan Kohberger and the evidence against him in relationship to the psychological positioning of motive. And this is where Dr. Brucato is an expert around the world, and hopefully we'll make some sense of that. Now, It's not necessary that the prosecution ever proves motive. Okay? But in this case, motive may become extremely, extremely first. Okay. And it's important that we understand some of the psychological pieces of this. And then the second prong that we're going to get into tonight is we're going to talk a little bit more about the house. And then we're going to tie that into the psychological aspect of Bryan Kohberger, why that house is vitally important to the very, very end of the trial. But first, we always want to remember why we are here. Kaylee, Maddie, Xana, Ethan, these 4 college students lost their lives, and we must remember them and their family, especially, again, at this time of year. So with that said, I want to welcome my dear friend, Dr. Gary Brucato. Welcome, Gary.
Thank you, Chris. A pleasure always.
Yes, always. It is a pleasure to have you here. So one of the things I want to just start right from the get-go, we look at the home as as an intangible, right? Once the evidence has been collected, released by the court, et cetera. But we don't connect sometimes psychologically why that home is critical to the very end of a situation. So I just have a real fast piece that I want to play for the audience before we get into our program here tonight, and it deals with just Xana. I could have put all 4 of them, but I didn't want to, belabor the suffering of the parents, quite frankly, and I'm the parent of a lost child. But I want people to hear her and know that it's her memory that's sitting inside of that building. And so I want to play this.
Hi, my name is Xana Kernodle. I'm a marketing major here at the University of Idaho, and I'm involved in a couple things down here, including Vandal Solutions. Last year, I did Blues Properties. I was an associate with them, and I basically just worked with Blues Properties and did advertising for them, did sales events, etc. And this year, I'm doing sales. So I'm a sales associate. So basically, I just call people around Moscow, ask them if they're interested in our business, etc. But yeah, I'm a junior here, so it's really exciting. I love it at the University of Idaho, and I'm super excited to be in this marketing class because it's basically my major. And this is actually King Street, where I've lived the past 2 years, and I really like just hanging out with my friends all the time and being super involved in school events and everything else. So yeah, that's just a little bit about me, and I'm really excited to take on this course.
Okay, so that's her. And so what we're going to talk about tonight is the loss of that beautiful child to a family and the other 3 children to their family. They will forever be stuck at 20 years old or the age that they passed away from this horrific event. So what we're going to do, and Dr. Brucato and I have, in utmost sensitivity, put this together this evening to talk about a potential psychological motive and or the behavior that would move this individual, Bryan Kohberger, towards the slaughter of 4 innocent lives. And now when you look at that house after tonight, I hope you see that child that we just played in your mind. And I hope somebody from the university is watching as well tonight, that it's not an intangible just building. That building has a story. And tonight, there are 2 sides to that story, a psychological piece and a physical piece. And we're going to attack both. So, Dr. Brucato, Gary, you've had so many right on target concepts here, but we've learned a lot more since the very first day that you spoke about who the perpetrator potentially, his personality potentially could be. And then, of course, Kohberger comes to the table unexpectedly, obviously. But so in his high school years, I think we have information that he was just kind of a loner, just kind of, stuck out there, got into a little of drug use. And then towards his pre-college time, he started getting interested in law enforcement and criminal justice, et cetera. Had problems with heroin. We all know about that. And to help us understand what you were thinking back when you first started to look at him, i.e. the personality, not Kohberger, but help us understand why these little bullet points that we're going to go over tonight are going to be critical.
Well, what was always complicated about the Idaho case was that those of us who spend a lot of time analyzing crime and taking a crime and putting it in the context of previous offenses that have occurred historically as a means of profiling or understanding who might have committed the offense. The challenge has been that this was technically, by any definition, a mass murder, right? There were 4 people who were killed in the same place at the same time. But what made it challenging was that there were features of it that were glimpsed that looked a lot more like what we see in individuals that are serial killers, not mass murderers. And so from the beginning, we were postulating that whoever did this was somebody who, probably more like a serial killer, was really going to be driven by a desire to level a playing field after probably years of feeling slighted or out of control, who probably was somebody who had a particular hostility toward women, that probably was somebody who had issues with his physical appearance because of the killing in the dark and at night, where the darkness is almost like a kind of costume for the individual in which they can be great, or hide, And we started to get a sense of an individual who was probably playing out a fantasy, that where it was some fantasy that had probably a subtext, a sexual subtext, but it wasn't as overt as it might be in some offenders. And so from the beginning, we said whoever did this is somebody who we think might go on to do this again, if not caught, because it's not like a mass murder where you just explode and emote and then you vanish or you commit suicide or whatever. We take your life, I should say, rather. I think that was really important in terms of beginning to understand who we were probably dealing with here. The other thing is, as I've said many times on the show, I had been one of the creators of the Columbia Mass Murder Database. That's the largest study ever done of mass murder. And we knew, based on the statistics, that the use of something other than a firearm was going to be much more associated with somebody who had some awkwardness, paranoia, or other kinds of authentic, odd traits. Doesn't mean that the person is insane or doesn't know what he's doing or something like that, but just that this was probably going to be an odd duck interpersonally, right? So we were picturing somebody whose awkwardness and who's being bullied or whatever was probably going to be related to being sort of weird interpersonally, right? So then Kohberger comes along and, of course, fits many of the features that we predicted. He is, of course, innocent until proven guilty in a court of law in the United States here. We do have that right. But if he is guilty, you have a very interesting match for a lot of the things that we talked about. For example, we discovered that he was indeed bullied, partially related to his physical appearance, right? Which was something that we had anticipated, particularly his weight. We learned that some of the, there were significant behavioral changes in him and a loss of control that came with the use of illicit substances, and that he was writing online about feeling a kind of sense of deadness and what we call depersonalization, where a person doesn't feel real, or that, that they're an actual human being. They look in the mirror and, he said he would look in the mirror and see meat, or, like an unreal person. he would even see other people that way, and the world felt kind of derealized. You could see that in people that are very stressed out or even quasi-psychotic or using drugs or alcohol. And we start to get the sense of a person who tried to take control of his life by becoming increasingly interested in the methodical, rote, mechanical life that is associated with law enforcement, right? And he clearly begins to develop a technical skill, under interest in things like surveillance and how that might be used to stop criminals and all of that. And what we also start to get a sense of is these little stories, each one from different sources that, we don't know if they're sort of independently, corroborated or so forth. But each of these stories, when, individually is interesting, but placed together, they wind up with a kind of cumulative effect that really starts to smack of somebody who also started to express a need for control and domination through overt hostility and also some quasi-sexualized kind of behaviors. A lot of things that we in the psychiatry world would call fetishes or paraphilias. A fetish it really has to do with an object or a scenario that is needed for sexual titillation. And paraphilia is where there is a type of person or living thing that is needed, but there's a perversion to it because the object is somebody that it's totally inappropriate, possibly even illegal, to have sexual desire toward or act out a sexual desire toward. So you start to see all these things that come together to suggest that there might have been an undertone of sexualized aggression. And you might say, well, these individual stories, they're just kind of random and they would, but, as Sherlock Holmes famously said, there's nothing more important than trifles. These little details are extremely important clues to somebody's personality and ultimately potentially clues to what the heck happened here. What is the motive? Now, 2 points I want to make about this before we even get into this. One is that when you're dealing with people who have more of a mass murder motive, a typical mass murder motive, the motive, I can tell you from having studied this, I created with my colleagues a typology of motive that was used to look at, pretty much every mass murder that we could find that occurred from 1900 for 119 years. And in 2019, we looked at it. And what we found was that the vast majority of mass murderers are motivated by emotional upset about some life event that they just don't tend to have the personal skills, the coping skills to deal with, not getting a job, being left by a loved one or significant other, losing their children, being fired, not winning a certain education prize or some other thing like that. So they're not mentally ill in the severe sense, right? Only a fragment of them are psychotic, severely mentally ill. Most of them are just brittle people. And then those divide up into people that are either impulsive, they explode and they just sort of go out and do what they do, or there are the types that are a little bit more psychopathic that scheme and decide on this date, I'm going to exact revenge, right? Down one. But with serial killers, what you see instead is this almost always sexualized thing where the individual has a desire to level the playing field for many years of feeling out of control or slighted or unwanted, rejected, where they use sex or sexualized actions or killing to assert domination and control, manipulation over someone. And that is a fantasy that starts usually very young and becomes more and more vivid over the years and then eventually is enacted. And if you look at the statistics, a lot of them are tripped over into actually enacting, into becoming, escalating because of the use of drugs or alcohol, which can kind of grease the wheels and disinhibit the individual. Some serial killers even used alcohol or drugs intentionally on the nights that they were going to go out and kill. Bundy, for example, would disinhibit himself in that way, right, to get himself hyped up to turn into the Mr. Hyde, that was necessary to commit these offenses, right? So the reason I'm telling all this is because it leads to my second point, which is I had, without getting into details, I appeared somewhere where there was an attorney speaking with me, and I was talking about how we were very interested in the motive for the Kohberger case, and if he's guilty, what the motive might have been in the context of his life. And the lawyer basically said, well, the motive doesn't mean anything. I don't even know why you're talking about, that kind of thing. And I did not get a chance to rebut that. But what I wanted to say was, I'll tell you why the motive matters. Because if this person is guilty, his character structure to people like us who study these things looks more like that of a person who would keep enacting a fantasy to perfect it. So a jury would need to know what was at stake in potentially letting such a person free. There's a very big difference between letting a mass murderer out into the world who might have insight all of a sudden that they can't believe they did this or whatever, and letting a person free who is motivated by fantasy and personality, because you can bet that is not going to stop with the release. In fact, one of the things I predicted, and we're going to talk about this, is that if Kohberger was anything like people thought, he would continue to behave that way in jail. That you would see a lot of the same behaviors because they would be so integral to the personality structure and the fantasy structure and the needs. And we're going to get into that. So that's the sort of overview. And what I think we're going to do tonight that people I think will find useful is to show how the elimination of the house where these offenses occurred is problematic because, number one, you need to retain it to completely understand the visual fantasy world of the individual of this type. And number two, how destroying it feeds into the very fantasies that were being enacted by such an individual, potentially, right? So that's why I wanted to sort of paint that before we even go any further. And now, I don't know what you want to sort of get into next.
No, this is
what you have on the screen. Yes.
No, that's perfect. That's perfect, Gary, because again, what everybody needs to understand tonight, and hopefully we know some of the family has been watching us. Hopefully these will be some thoughts that you will be able to have in further conversations with those who are in charge, i.e. the university, of potentially taking that home down. Because what we want to do here tonight is tie together from an investigative analysis aspect as well as a psychological analysis aspect, the behavior and why that home is critical based on what just Dr. Brucato just stated. But first, we have to go back to what we call a suspectology, right? Where you have these pre-incident behaviors, the first college's experience, the pool party. Now, Gary, I think a lot of folks forgot that you were well aware of a lot of this information well before he had ever come up to the surface here. But we have a Tinder incident, we have a pool party incident. We're not sure if the car incident is in play, but if it is in play, you would agree, right, that it would be consistent with his buildup to this process.
Well, let me just clarify a couple of things. So first of all, at the level of when we were creating a profile, we knew nothing of who this person was. I mean, just to be crystal clear, to clarify what you said there. And the other thing is I think what you're referring to is that sometimes media outlets would run things by me, that had sort of come to their attention before they might have wound up in the papers, whatever, and I would comment, and whether they used my comments or not is a whole other story. But sometimes I would, like, for example, when I appeared on Dateline, obviously during the interviews, things were, asked of me that had not yet come to the attention of the wider media. So I think that's kind of what you're referring to, those kinds of situations. Not that law enforcement was telling me things, right, but I would be hearing them through the media, now. So we talked about that he had this sort of, visual snow. We talked about that last time, that kind of fuzzy visual field. We don't know exactly what caused that. We talked about his drug use, talked about his depersonalization, derealization, his isolation, his sense of having no feelings at all. And seeing people like they were quote unquote meat, and then suddenly trying to take control in his own life through this becoming interested in the methodical lifestyle of somebody involved in law enforcement, but also the veganism and to an almost obsessional degree. We heard stories like, here are some trifles, right, that are important. Stories like getting rid of pots and pans that had touched meat because of the idea that they might be contaminated, things that had that kind of quality. And we see that same kind of obsessionality with the cleaning up that he's accused of doing, after offenses. Now, one thing that I have always found fascinating that, again, was not made, a very big deal was not made of it, but it was in some news reports, was that his landlord at the time of arrest pointed out that he had this very peculiar habit of being up all night long, vacuuming and showering. Now, I always thought that that was extremely interesting because it pointed to that mechanical, restricted, obsessional type of person, odd person that we had speculated we were going to find in this situation. But it's also interesting because the kind of person that we suspect this might be, this is all speculation based on the information we have, is somebody who probably was engaging in behaviors that were slowly building up toward murder, that would have potential sexualized quality, which could include things like peeping, stalking behavior, and other things like that. And so one starts to wonder, what is he cleaning off of himself? What is he vacuuming up all night long? Is it dirt from people's yards? Is it, is he worried about, what got on him when he was peeping? Things like that, right? So you start getting a sense of a person who can't go to sleep because he's worried that he's got something incriminating there that could be traced back to him. And he, being somebody who understood criminology, would know what a gold mine of data he would be if he didn't clean himself up. And, right after such a...
And one of the things that I thought was a brilliant observation that you had.
Yes. Yeah, it was actually, wait, hold on. It wasn't, and it's, somebody just reminded me, it wasn't a landlord. It was like a neighbor.
A neighbor.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. But had he been, like, one of the things we talked about is if he had items on him like dirt, anything that would connect him back to that house
or any house
in its pre-incident, or any house,
right?
Is he meticulous enough to be aware of that and to get rid of it before anything ever happens?
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, so I think that already you start getting glimpses of a person who likely was beginning to engage. I mean, if he's guilty, and based on previous offenders and based on what we're saying, we would speculate that he was somebody who was beginning to enjoy these sexualized kind of fetish-like kind of behaviors that might have been things like peeping, looking at people, so forth. And then we put that together with the cleaning up behavior, and you start getting a little curious about what was going on there. The other thing is, as we start to look at this list, what we would want to see in such an individual who had more of a serial killer-like quality, a lot of fetishistic and paraphilic kind of behaviors, right? And when we take these little stories and we put them together, first of all, we have to raise the question, are they any of them true, right? We always want to bear in mind that they could be untrue. But if they are true, think about all the things we heard in these little stories, right? So first, we've got this person up all night. That's really interesting. Then we have this incident, for example, where he goes on a date and the woman says that at first, he's fine, whatever. But then he starts getting very pushy, supposedly about wanting to go up to her place. And then apparently wants to engage in tickling, right? And, that's important to understand, that in and of itself can be a fetish for some people, right? And there is some literature that suggests that particular fetish may be have something to do with asserting control, or even almost like a sadistic thrill that you're asserting over another person, but it looks innocent and playful, right? But it really isn't. Sometimes you can even tie the person with the tickling, right? So she pretends that she's sick. She goes to the bathroom, and then he leaves and he sends her this peculiar note about having great birthing hips, right? So there we have a quasi, like a kind of sexualized, fetishistic kind of behavior that we get a glimpse of. Then we have this incident that we've talked about previously that cannot really be tied to him clearly because he'd have to be in March before the murders in Idaho, although he was remotely studying. We don't know where he was. There's this incident of the panties being in the console and so forth of this young woman's car. And we also know that the car is like a stone's throw from the house where the murders occurred in Idaho. So we start thinking, is there that kind of fetishistic behavior? Taking panties? Did he indulge himself? No semen test was done to my knowledge, but we don't know what he did. And was he spying? Was he stalking? Was he manipulating to try to get the women in the house to get spooked and install cameras? Then we have this incident that's talked about in the Dateline episode where he supposedly breaks into a woman's house, messes with the stuff there to spook her. She then wants cameras installed. He installs the cameras, and then, possibly knowing the Wi-Fi password or whatever, can actually spy on her. So there we have the potential sexualized behavior of voyeurism, right? Then there's this idea that he supposedly has some IDs of other people that are in his possession inside a glove at home. Keeping trophies or objects that relate to people that you have committed offenses against or fantasized about also has a fetishistic quality to it, right? And it is not an uncommon behavior in serial killers. And then you have this incident, which I found fascinating, which was reported in the New York Post in January, that when he when he's in jail, that this female offender is being held.
Hang on for a minute, and I'll pull the article up. And by the way, everything we're talking about,
it's over.
They have interviewed all of these alleged people that came forward and said, look, this is what happened to me. So everything is documented in terms of, in the public arena, from the media, et cetera. Why people lie or why they wouldn't lie, that's to be, up to the individual reader or whoever to believe it. But
again, it's interesting that collectively they all smack of that same social awkwardness, the quasi, the either quasi-sexual or kind of a little more overtly sexual quality, the aggressiveness, the godlike feelings that seem to be asserted by such a person, and the high need for control. When you put all that together, you get a very interesting kind of personality. But this story fascinated me. It got very little attention. But according to this story, when he's being held in jail, this female offender is being held sort of like across from him, and she's overhearing him. And apparently according to this other inmate, take it with a grain of salt, he was attempted to expose himself to, as I understand it, a female guard. And in addition, was making highly provocative and aggressive statements, including things like, come in here and I'm going to cut you too, and stuff like that, right? So that now look, I don't know if that's true, but it would be consistent with the continuation of a certain type of personality and certain fantasy needs right into the jail cell, right? An uncontrollable, in a way, kind of need to play those same themes out. It's almost like a miniature version of what may have gone on out in the world, right? So you have a female or a person of authority that is asserting power over you, and you essentially have to crush them, dominate them, insult them, threaten them with aggression, and there's a sexualized exposure quality, right, to it. So that I think that's where we start getting into the question of motive. And what I think the average person out in the world, kind-hearted, sweet, intelligent people who don't spend all day listening to murderers are going to struggle to understand is that fantasy and personality can be a motive. And that motive is extremely important, because if you have that motive will not go away. You are not going to go out in the world and stop. People who have that motive keep doing it to perfect a fantasy. They have a prototype person they're mad at. They displace it onto individuals out in the community who look the part or play the part. And when that person is unfortunately eliminated, it moves to the next person over and over and over again until they are killed or commit suicide, take their lives, or wind up incarcerated. And so that's why this was a deeply worrisome individual if he is guilty. And this is not the traditional mass murderer who quietly, ends the career in crime after the mass murder.
Yeah, and that's
right. Mm-hmm.
That's why the media incidents where he goes and puts the camera in for the friend.
Right. If the Dateline story is true, yes. Uh-huh.
Right. And then he wants to move himself into the police department to help them understand how to capture people like this. I mean, that in of itself is fascinating, that he's taking a teacher role to law enforcement right in front of them. I mean, what say you on that?
Well, I mean, I think the whole point is that the way a person of this potential type would deal with feelings of inadequacy and being out of control is to have to be the smartest person in the room. And that is also a report that we frequently heard from people's, colleagues, students, etc., that he always seemed to want to correct everybody or be the smartest person, and kind of in a kind of condescending kind of way. And I think that was a way of asserting dominance, virility, etc., because he was accused of especially doing that with women. And you saw that also with the female police officer who pulls him over. And he basically, in a condescending kind of way, schmoozes her into sort of feeling as if he knows more than she does. So I think this is a pervasive quality. And this is the kind of person that if he's, if he is guilty, he's the kind of person that you could sort of tap him at any moment in his life and you'll see the same theme, right? So we get this plethora of stories, women in an eatery become weirded out by him to the point that they need to communicate to each other through those electronic boards, like, this guy's a weirdo, he's going to say some weird things. People at a pool party being weirded out by him, finding that they're totally kind of uncomfortable around him or don't understand why he thinks there's intimacy, between him and them when they are not really talking to each other. So that what you start to get a sense of also is a person whose social skills were very peculiar, who didn't understand the effect that he had when people were talking to him. He is socially weird and thinks that he has connections with people that are stronger than they are, right? And so with the high need for control, the need to kind of become attached to people more quickly, the godlike strivings, you start getting a sense that the personality structure is very common in stalkers. And we do suspect, based on what we're hearing here, that there would have been some stalking behavior. One of the things that haunts me about like the TikTok videos and things like you were showing is how much the house is shown. And if my hypothesis has always been that if this guy's guilty, he was looking at the intended target probably from across the country before they ever even met each other, or across, some distance. And all those things showing the inside of the house, etc., are intel for such a person, showing the outside of the house, showing if there's a balcony, showing where there's a garage, showing, where the windows are, showing where how you might access the roof, where the trees are, how far away a car could park and have clear view, etc. You have to picture a person who's thinking like a general, who's thinking like, I need every drop of intel, so that those videos become almost like drone footage or something like you might use to plot an attack. And I think as a general warning, I would be very careful out in the world. I mean, showing the inside of one's home or thing, if one is, is concerned about being targeted by somebody, right? Because that's all intel. And you understand what I'm getting at, Chris?
Absolutely. And, we have, obviously there's some of the car footage, the video footage of what appears
Right.
to be his vehicle. I mean, it's to be determined at this point, but there's a high probability based on the type of video that they confiscated and put into evidence. And it's mentioned, that he came back to the area at least 12 separate times. The night of, it appears he may have gone around circles of that house, which is indicative of, a surveillance situation that you're talking about, because he's prepping, to your point, to make sure that as the moment occurs, that it is going to go exactly the way his fantasy wants it to go. But it never does it, Doc?
No, it never does. And if he is guilty, the way that the crime, played out probably was nothing like he intended. I am convinced that he went in there with the intention of killing one person, if he did it, killing one person, and everything got totally out of control. And that would be highly, highly offensive to this kind of personality, who would then say, I need to do this again and get it perfect next time. Another thing that has a fetishistic quality to it is the idea that he was returning the next day, supposedly, right? So if he did this, why would he return to the scene of the crime? Well, the pragmatic reason would be, perhaps I want to get the sheath back. I want to see, if there's any way I could get back in there and kind of clean up, whatever. But on a fantasy level, for example, we think about Son of Sam, David Berkowitz, who was somebody who had a lot of qualities that we see, in this kind of offender, where there isn't the fully overt sexualized quality, but we know that he was, setting fires and doing things to pleasure himself. And what he would enjoy is watching the police and the emergency personnel descend on the scene. It made him feel that Berkowitz had caused that, had made it happen like a god, right? And so, you start thinking about somebody sort of sitting in their car watching and thinking, they're seeing my output. They're beginning the study of, the kind of study that I studied. I know what they're about to do, the kind of data collection they're about to do. I know how they're going to see the bodies and be completely shocked and horrified. I know they're going to be taking photos. I know they're going to, and you start imagining a person who sees that house like his canvas, right? His output.
Like the painter.
And is going to have to sit back and watch it, right? Like God resting on the seventh day, and sitting back and watching what God hath wrought, right? So that's the way a person like that is going to feel. And they're also going to enjoy that you have no idea they're there. Because again, there's that voyeuristic watching quality. It's fascinating when you think that as a younger person, he was talking about feeling like he was outside of the world. He was a spectator. He was a voyeur to himself, right? So you already have that person who kind of feels like they're over here and life is down here, right?
That's a really good point.
Right.
I don't think anybody's made that connection yet.
Well, it's interesting, right? So then you take that, you project it outward, and now you are dissociated from the world, and they're basically just players on your stage, right? And so you put all this stuff together, and if each of these stories is true, the cumulative effect is what we call in the business escalation, right? So, I mean, those of us who study how people who commit these kind of offenses move up to their first murders, you see this pattern, right? Where there's, voyeurism, probably pornography that's fueling things, perhaps some kind of sexual assaults or inappropriate behaviors with women or other people, and you just keep moving up because it's not enough. Like a drug, you need more and more and more and more, and you get more bold, and you learn from other offenders how to get away with stuff, and you mimic their techniques, and you possibly even go into the house and you look around and you touch things and you look at the people possibly when they're sleeping or during a party, or you try to float into the background and you're observing everything, you're casing the joint. So that I think that's the kind of thing we want to picture. We're not talking about a mass murder where somebody got upset about something at school, found a random house, went in and killed people. We're talking about the enactment of a long-standing fantasy. And I want to emphasize that those kinds of people are very different. And I mean, I think I've driven it home, and hopefully the audience understands that.
Yeah, I think so. And one of the other things that I think we should mention is the just to dovetail into the cleaning aspect, not only before the incident but post-incident, the fact that he was observed and under surveillance with the FBI, cleaning his car, putting his trash in additional neighbors' lawns, wearing gloves, et cetera, is just right in line with exactly what you're talking about. And keeping items, we have not found that, or the authorities have not found that knife to date. However, we have some, if Papa Rogers is connected to him, and we don't know that until the court trial and the authorities say so. But if it is, and he says in there, then they must have found the sheath. I find that a very, telling piece of this puzzle as it unfolds. What say you?
I think I agree with you. And again, with hiding behind a fake name on the internet and all that, controlling the narrative, that same kind of behavior, right? And so I think we want to start to get a glimpse of a person who is like a kind of a puppet master, who sees himself as a puppet master. And I urge everyone to read that article, that New York Post article, because if the quote is correct, the quote says, "I will cut you two." Right? It's that two word that is very disturbing, because who is he referring to cutting the first time? Who's he cutting up the first time for making him feel small and insecure, right? Is he basically saying, oh, you're picking on me because I'm the guy accused of what happened in Idaho? Well, I'll cut you up too, right? So that's a far cry from the quiet, the taciturn, statuesque figure that sort of sits, and stares at the camera that we're seeing on TV, right? Every time I see it, I think of Edgar Allan Poe. His eyes had all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and so that you got that kind of quality, right? And I just kind of think, knowing all this, it's all a control tactic.
Yeah.
It's all a control tactic, right? So and the kind of person who you don't want to mess with him because he won't let go of a grudge. He'll assert dominance and he'll threaten. That's what it sounds like went on even in the jail. But we can't. We have to. That's only if that person's telling the truth.
And look what type of lectures he's a fan of. Margaret Atwood. Tell us why that's important.
Well, again, this gets right to that. There's nothing more important than trifles point, because of course there are millions of people who love Margaret Atwood. I happen to love her myself. I think she's brilliant. But what's so interesting about that is, remember that Margaret Atwood's most famous work is The Handmaid's Tale. And The Handmaid's Tale is a book about the subjugation of women. Remember that birthing hips point, right? This is about the subjugation of women in a kind of dystopian post-nuclear society where women essentially on command have to engage in sexual acts with men to raise children for other people, right? To have children for other people. And they have to live a restricted, mechanical, avoidant life, exactly the kind of life he was living, right? Everything wrote and so forth. So it's kind of interesting that would figure into the psychology of somebody like this,
yeah,
right?
There he is.
Right.
He's in the front row. He's in the front row with a program. So he's in it.
Right. It just doesn't shock me. And look how close she is to him.
Yeah. So also, let me get to the next one here. Sorry, I'm going between screens. Okay, so this brings us to his question of his thesis, right? And his master thesis. Mm-hmm. I love this first question here because when I first read it, when Dr. Petraka, yourself, and Ann, and Greg, when we all broke this down, but you three specifically, I love this first question now in retrospect, thinking, where this crime started. It started at his, long before, but look at the first question. Did you prepare for the crime before leaving your home? Now, what's interesting to me, what jumped out right away was, wait a minute, why is this question so relevant to people that have committed, heinous crimes? Most of those heinous crimes don't necessarily always start in the home. Why couldn't it have been, when you left your house or the street or wherever? But here he's very specific and he wants to know what the feelings were. Everything's about feelings here. Why is that important?
Well, what you're picking up on there, and I think is I agree 100%, is that what it suggests is that he was interested in people who fantasized about committing an offense before committing it. So you get a glimpse of a person who has what you call malice aforethought, thinking it through beforehand and fantasizing about how it's going to go. That gets right to the heart of what I'm trying to say. This is not one of these impulsive, if he's guilty, not one of these impulsive mass murderer types that just picks up a weapon and goes and picks a random target and starts, attacking. This is more like somebody that would be interested in how the murder is the fulfillment of a period of fantasy. And that's that remark, getting to the phenomenology of that in the minds of other offenders, seems to me him saying, I want to understand myself, right? Because let's face it, the questions in that thesis or whatever it was were basically a blueprint to understand what he'd want to know about him, what he would want somebody to find interesting about him if he were one day the offender being asked questions, right? I always said if I ever get to meet him, I'm bringing those questions in and I'm asking those questions one by one. Here's what I want to know. Did you prepare for the crime before leaving your home? Please detail what you were thinking and feeling at that point, right? Or at this point. And the other thing that was interesting about these questions to Ann and Victor and me is that depression is not a risk factor for violence at all. maybe for suicidality, but not for violence. And yet he probes about it. And we know that he himself described experiencing dysphoric mood and so forth. So here you have a person who's wondering, what's the relationship between being depressed and killing? Because for him, feeling small and negative and insecure may have been involved in the feelings that then had to be compensated for through the sexualized behaviors and the violence if he is guilty. So it's an interesting comment.
And I love the Columbo at the end. Before leaving, is there anything else you did? It's like, okay, did I forget something that I haven't learned yet?
Well, let's see. What's the next question? Let me just look at them quickly again. It's been a little while. After arriving, what steps did you take prior to locating the victim or target, i.e. person or object? What an interesting thing to say, person or object. Please detail your thoughts and feelings. Why did you choose that victim or target over others? Also implies fantasy. Before making your move, just sort of an inappropriate phrase, I think. How did you approach the victim or target? Please detail what you were thinking and feeling. What was the first move you made in order to accomplish your goal? Please detail any thoughts and feelings at this point. And how did you accomplish your goal? Please explain what you were thinking and feeling. Notice accomplish your goal. That has a very objectifying tone to it, doesn't it? It's like saying, how did you tick that off your checklist instead of talking about a human being? That matches that kind of overly intellectualized mechanical quality that we think of this person as seeming to have. Because to say, how did you accomplish your goal is a very offensive phrase. I mean, I would never say such a thing to an offender. Accomplish your goal, right? Think about it.
Yeah, because you're 100% right. And which is I want to show one other article here, which kind of this is a good place to take it. Let me see here. What number is it?
And by the way,
go
what
ahead.
Do you think an offender would do before they left that he could be referring to?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
I'm teasing. I don't know what you're thinking on this one, but I mean, for him, obviously it was, it was the hour, it was the time in terms of he had built up to that place and he had this fantasy charge about what was going to take place on the other side of this. So
fantasy is enacted. So then what else would there be to do before you left? Well, cleaning up, right? Cleaning up, taking trophies and mementos, right? And possibly some kind of sexual gratification or, and that's where there are some offenders do things like take cell phone photos. They might take, pieces of hair or other kind of objects, property taken out of the pants of or other things of the property of these people. In other words, an inventory should be done of every single object to determine what might be missing. Because, I always think it's a weird thing to say, but when I think about the cleanup after a murder, I often picture like a person leaving a hotel and they're shoving everything into the bags, whatever. And they're like taking things and mementos from their trip and all that, because for them, an offense like this is like living out a fantasy. So it's like, you're going to remember it the way you or I would remember a trip to Hawaii. Right. It's like you've enacted something and you want mementos. And so as you're sort of leaving, you're going, what do I need to do to make this memorable for myself? But I also want the next guest who comes into the hotel room to not even know that I was here. Right. So you go in the bathroom, you make sure you throw everything out, you flush the toilet, you make sure, you check under the bed, whatever.
Poo.
Yeah. So you start picturing somebody doing that. Right. And, and I think it's interesting to kind of think about that, like him running around and doing that. And then this nonchalant sort of strolling out, looking dazed and leaving the sheath because, did he not have time? Did he make a stupid mistake? Did he have some of that dissociation that he talked about? Did the sheath fall off because he opened his belt, to engage in a sexual act? We don't really know. The other thing is, why are there prints on that button when this was a glove-wearing guy? How'd that happen? You know, did he take the
Preemptive.
gloves off?
He's getting ready.
It could have been before the offense, or it could have been that he wanted to enjoy that and he took the gloves off.
Yeah, he wanted to make it as personal as he could get because he knew he was in it.
Right. We don't know. But
of course,
right.
And of course, I don't think a lot of folks completely understand that. Obviously, this stuff never goes the way their fantasy is playing out. It just there are so many interruptions.
Does anything ever go the way you picture it?
No, never.
Exactly.
So I put this one up because these are going to be friends that you had talked about this a long time ago about the type of people that would step forward and say, look, he was off, et cetera, which goes back to our other, slide that I put up there a little bit ago. So the next slide I want to put up here is making it go away. Why the psychological aspect of this and this house is going to be so critical here. And one of the things that we want to talk about is I read some information about some emails, interdepartment email, in relationship to who's driving this conversation here. And it's obvious that the authorities and the defense had signed off. And if you want to see some of these emails, they're in Reddit. Now, I don't know what the reliability of these is. That's why I'm not putting them up here. I'm not going to, but the gist of it is that UI is driving the conversation about, okay, it's over. Let's move on. Let's keep going. And I think that's honorable in definitely trying to help kids or the rest of the community heal. There's no question, in my opinion, that the community needs to heal. The only disagreement I think I will have is it can wait until after the trial. That is just my opinion. It is my opinion that they should wait. This was the page that was set up to donate. This is a fundraiser page, obviously, for the university. The Vandy Healing Garden raised approximately $54,000 of $800,000 raised for the university. And you can also go and watch this video about the Memorial Garden. But one of the things that bothered me here is it was the death of these 4 children, and I say children because I'm an old guy. Kaylee, Maddie, Xana, and Ethan, and I know they're adults and I know they're young adults, okay? So don't give me a lot of grief on that in the chat, okay? However, this incident then drove the university to make a statement which kind of, I don't know how to take it. It says the sad reality is that we lose students each year to a variety of causes. So this memorial is driven by the death of these 4 students. And yet, the university takes it as an opportunity to say, yeah, but there's a whole bunch of other people that have died too. And which I get that piece of the puzzle, but we're talking about a crime scene here. And that crime scene, the integrity of that crime scene, in my opinion, needs to be maintained. It does not need to be destroyed yet because there's a whole bunch of other stuff going on. And in one of these emails that I read, they talked about they remove walls, pieces of the wall. They remove floorboard out of there. And this is a picture of me a long time ago at the ME's office where we took a wall out, okay, and it was so that the jury could see it. Okay? But one of the things I don't think they are considering yet, and Gary, I'm going to play this here for you, and you tell me what you think about this. This was something that I don't think anybody's thinking ahead yet. Watch this.
A former student who graduated in 2022 and lived at the same house during his junior year talks about his experience there.
It's definitely an old, creaky house. You can't walk up any of the stairs or on any of the floors without everybody in the house knowing it.
They all told
Cole Alternator says the building doesn't offer much privacy and was well known to students.
A lot of students are very familiar with the inside of the home around the community. There have been thousands of people that have likely been through it throughout the years. Even when we had it, there were people that would come and knock on the door or walk in thinking that it was somebody else's house.
Now, as the school closes for winter break, the house and campus quiet, but police say their search for the killer will not slow down.
Okay, so what I want everybody to hear one more time, and it's only 30 seconds. Listen how he describes the interior of that house.
A former student who graduated in 2022 and lived at the same house during his junior year talks about his experience there.
It's definitely an old creaky house. You can't walk up any of the stairs or on any of the floors without everybody in the house knowing it.
Cole Alternator says the building doesn't offer much privacy and was well known to students.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you've just heard that guy testify. The first question I would ask if I was the defense, and by the way, I'm not giving the defense any ideas, trust me. They've already thought through this. Okay. The first question I would ask is, so what did it sound like when somebody stepped on those stairs? And then we have to cross our fingers, hopefully right now. And if you're paying attention, anybody, the university or whoever, I hope you have an acoustic engineer that has gone into that house and has recorded those steps from floor to floor, because there's a witness right there that could testify that every single one of those steps was creaky and that everybody would know that you're in that house and that they were squeaky. So the first question is going to be to one of the surviving witnesses is, did you hear him? And if so, what did you hear? And then they have to put on evidence that that person could hear it. Okay. The fact that this is in existence on the internet somewhere, this guy, okay, and they're going to find him. I know they will. If I was a defense investigator, I'd find him tomorrow. Right? And you can bet he'd be on their list, their evidence list. But if this university has not thought through the fact that maybe even the police haven't thought through the fact of having an acoustic engineer, it's great that they've put a FARO in there and they have a 3D model. But remember, sight, sound, smell, everything is relevant in a homicide investigation, especially something this critical and this high profile. Gary, thoughts on what I've mentioned here?
No, I think that's very interesting. I mean, the fact of the matter is that there are certain things that happen in a house that have to be experienced firsthand. I mean, last time we talked about the Kohberger case, I talked about the Lizzie Borden case. And, remember that in the Lizzie Borden case, there was this whole idea that an intruder supposedly came in while Lizzie was there, because she was basically in the house with, the stepmother upstairs, and the father comes in, whatever. And she claims that an intruder came in and must have come in and killed them. But we've got the cleaning person outside, doesn't see anybody go in or out. It doesn't really make any sense. Okay. So I went to visit that house with a friend of mine. And I said to him, I'm going to be down here in the living room where the father would have been, on the couch. And I want you to go upstairs to the bedroom where the stepmother is killed. And I want you to tap your foot on the floorboard. And I want to see how the sound travels. And as soon as he barely touched the floor, it boomed through the house. And it became obvious that there was no way in the world that a body, hit the floor, being butchered, her screaming, whatever, that Lizzie wouldn't have heard it with an intruder in that house, or that the father, when he was there, didn't know something was going on, that there was some kind of kerfuffle going on. I mean, it's a ridiculous idea, but I didn't understand that until I was actually in that house and heard it with my own ears, the same way it would have been experienced in the 19th century, right? So you need that house. Yeah. That's the scientist in me. And it wouldn't have done any good to have, photographs of the house or something to give me an idea of the acoustics, right? You got to hear it.
Yeah, and it goes to, we looked up a couple of high profile cases, right? One of them is the staircase murder, which is Kathleen Peterson in 2001. The jurors wanted to go walk through that home. Now, granted, right? I mean, you and I can agree 100%, Gary, that not every jury wants to go see the house. We get that, not a problem.
But they should have the option.
Yeah, it's an option. And when it's being driven from an outside force, okay, because I read those two emails, and the emails came from the university's attorney to the law enforcement agencies and the defense. If those emails are accurate, then it's being totally driven by the university. And at this point, okay, in where this particular case stands, and if you know the family, please share this video with them. Okay. The acoustics, I would submit to you, I know they have acoustics based on the cameras behind the house and some of the neighbors. That's a no-brainer. But I hope they had an acoustic engineer go in there and do their thing. I would submit to you, I hope they did it. I just hope they did it, because if they didn't, that's a huge gap and it's going to be a problem. The other problem that I have is the fact that they went back after 6 months ago. They said, go ahead and tear it down. And then a couple of weeks ago, they go back in just to make sure. If the attorneys are having doubts before the trial, just to make sure, when a jury of Kohberger's peers, i.e. the public, is sitting in that jury box, they have to start with the presumption of innocence. They have to. The court's going to admonish him. He's innocent, and so will the defense attorney, and quite frankly, so will the prosecutor.
Right, but it's important to bear in mind, I mean, for the audience to really get that on both sides of the case, it's problematic. It can also affect Kohberger's due process.
Yeah, but
so that it's not just that it's unfair to families, that it could help with his defense or whatever. It could work the other way. And then that's why it boggles the mind. Why the rush? You're only talking about people who have been exposed in the fall semester, seeing the house again in the spring semester until a probable summer trial. It's not like, you've got a fresh crop of people popping up that have to see this house for the first time. And, it's been sitting there. They've been exposed to it. They're used to it. I hope, but maybe not. But the idea is that the way it's being depicted is that it's some kind of, demonic emblem that has to be torn down. Okay, I understand that it's traumatizing and so forth, but the fact is the need may outweigh.
Well, and what's interesting about this is you have all of the authorities, okay, all the authorities saying, okay, I've heard it, I've seen it, I already know. You have all the scientific authorities saying, we collected it, we bagged it, we tagged it, we have photographs, we have models, okay? But the jury hasn't seen it. They are the most important piece of the puzzle. The jury has not seen the interior of that house. Sure, they're going to hear, or see photographs, etc. Okay, but it's different when we play a situation like this, just as simple as this is. Okay, just this simple little thing right here, where
a lot of students
this former young man lived in that house. He experienced that house and has a description for it.
A former student who graduated in 2022 and lived at the same house during his junior year talks about his experience there.
It's definitely an old creaky house. You can't walk up any of the stairs or on any of the floors without everybody in the house knowing it.
Cole Alternator says the building doesn't offer much privacy and was well known to students.
A lot of students are very familiar with the inside of the home around the community. There have been
okay, so I'm going to, I would submit to you that they just need to stop while they're ahead. Okay. They need to stop while they're ahead because they still have the house. And Maria, no, you're not correct. I've worked over 300 murders. I still work murder for the job that I do, and you are 100% inaccurate. So I hate to blow your bubble there, but unfortunately, the technology that they have is not physically like being there. It doesn't exist. Or else the option for a juror to go to a crime scene would not exist. Because, the fact that they went out to Moselle, they had the same stuff out there. They had acoustics, they had all kinds of stuff. But the jury wanted to go to Moselle. And in Peterson, like I was talking about, 2001, Kathleen Peterson, the staircase, they wanted to go down to where the wife was found at the bottom of the staircase. And of course, O.J. Simpson in 94, one of the biggest murders going at the time, they wanted to go to the Brentwood house and the crime scene where Nicole and Ron Goldman were killed. Jurors got to visit both of those particular locations, okay, both of them. And then, of course, we go back to one of the most famous mass murders in U.S. history. Not, Gary, you're the expert on it, but, the Florida school shooter who walked into, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland 5 years after, in 2018. The building remained mostly untouched for 5 years. Okay, after the shootings, and was used as evidence not only in the criminal trial, but a civil lawsuit. Isn't that interesting? We're also forgetting about that piece of the puzzle. If Bryan Kohberger is not convicted and a jury, puts him out there to walk, just like in O.J. Simpson, they could file civil rights violations against him, and they could take him in a civil court. Well, what if the evidence is gone? Well, that exposes the university, if you ask me. If they knew beforehand that they should not have done it in a civil trial, that could put them at some serious exposure. Just saying, just thinking out loud. And I could be wrong, but I don't know, the way things are, that could be a problem. And the jurors, of course, one of the, back in the day, Jeffrey McDonald, and now Gary, and I know, Gary, you've studied each and every one of these at length, who stabbed his wife and his two young daughters in February 1970. They faced a haunting scene, even though it took 9 years for that case to go to trial. They went back to that house to see what was going on in that house, to feel it, to sense it, and to understand it. What do you think, Dr. Brucato?
Well, I think you raised some very interesting points, and I have to tell you that, just as a very interesting little side note, the McDonald case was the basis for Michael Stone's scale. It was presenting in that court case that made him create the scale to help the jury understand why he was a particularly dangerous offender. FYI, I don't know if you realize that the connection between Michael Stone. In fact, Michael Stone was very involved in that case. Fatal Vision and the whole thing, that book. I think it's a very interesting point, and I find myself thinking how sound figures into that story. Like, for example, there are things that are puzzling, like, wouldn't there have been some screaming that the third and fourth victim would have heard and alerted them? Were they in a deep sleep? Why not? Like, let's say the Zaina and Ethan were the first and second victim. Would Kaylee and Maddie not have heard? Why wasn't the dog barking when somebody came in? Right.
These are acoustic questions, right?
Right. These are things that sort of bother me. And I'm a very sensory person when I think about a crime scene, right? So I'm like picturing myself walking in and everything I'd want to know. I'd be interested in everything from, like, what was the amount of moonlight coming through the windows, to illuminate the room, to, what would footsteps have sound like in that room? What if there was running water? Would you have heard it through the pipes so that you'd be able to testify that somebody seemed to have been cleaning up?
Yeah, what if he did clean up in there, right, Gary? I mean, you've said that.
Right.
You've
Well,
always questioned.
I mean, he wasn't apparently covered in blood when he walked out, and based on those murders, he would have been pretty covered in cast off and blood and so forth. You know that from having investigated. I don't have to tell you that. He would have been covered. Did he bring a change of clothes? Another thing is if he is guilty and he was peeping or creeping around or in that house, would he have been able to walk in such a way that the floorboards wouldn't have creaked, that you wouldn't have known it, that he was right there in the room? Was he looking at people when they were sleeping? Was he hiding in a closet? Was he out on a balcony? Was he in the snow? Was he in a, were there trees rustling? All that stuff matters. But I think, the most important thing, as far as I'm concerned, is that you have some family members who don't want that house torn down, even for a non-pragmatic reason. There's this horrifying idea that getting rid of the house is like a way of saying that, well, could be interpreted as a way of saying that the people who were there, are kind of gone too, that they didn't matter, that they just kind of get swept away, and in a certain way, that's like the ultimate fulfillment of the fantasy of that kind of offender, right? It's the idea like that you're mine and I dominate and I control the narrative and you just get like wiped off the map. Now you're insignificant, Now, obviously, the university wouldn't see it that way. They'd see it that they're putting a garden there to memorialize and so forth. Although it is puzzling, that I thought the point was to forget, but they want to have a memorial garden. It's a little, but I suppose the idea is to memorialize it in a more appropriate way. And but I think it's important to understand, like, there's even been a statement from the Gonzalez family about how they feel about this. Right? It looks like you have it on the screen.
Yeah,
I think you should read it to the audience. It's very important.
Yeah, the decision to tear down the house was made to decrease further impact, quote unquote, on other students living in the neighborhood. It is the grim reminder of the heinous act that took place there, University of Idaho President Scott Green said. While we appreciate the emotional connection some family members of the victims may have to this house, it is time for its removal and to allow the collective healing of our community to continue. That's a rip right out of his email. So this is a canned response. Again, Kohberger defense team will be at the house taking pictures and measurements of the area Thursday and Friday. Once they are done, the university will start to prepare for the demolition. As I've said from the very beginning, and I'm going to answer Micro Kimmy's question here, what would be justifiable reason demo prior to trial? In my opinion, none. There is none until the trial is over. Finishing up here what I said, or what they have here. The house is a daily reminder, said Jody Walker, the communication manager for U of I. We'll never forget. We can't forget, but we can heal. We can come together and we can begin to move into the next phase. You notice a lot, this is all driven by the conversation from UI, okay, not from the court system. You don't have the district attorney making a statement here, and you don't have the defense here. The defense, that's simple. They're going to step up and say, yeah, knock it down, make it go away. We agree. We stipulate to it, make it happen. Okay. And they're going to go back. And at the end, we're going to show you why we're tying this all together here. The family of Kaylee Concalves, one of the victims, has previously shared their reservations about demolishing the home. On Friday, the family, through their attorney, Shannon Gray, released the following statement. Let us ask this. Isn't it better to have the King Road house and not need it than to need the house and not have it? That has been our question to the prosecution and the University of Idaho for the entire time of the demo of the King Road, since the demo of the King Road has been an issue. Why is it even up for discussion? This is one of the most horrific crimes in the history of Idaho, and the University of Idaho wants to destroy one of the most critical pieces of evidence in the case. And it is also important to make note there is now a demolition date before there is even a trial date set. This alone speaks volumes. It is obvious from the two recent visits to the house, both the prosecution and the defense, that there is still evidentiary value in having the King Road house still standing. There may be additional discovery by either party that prompts one side or the other to go back to the scene of the crime. There has always been a dialogue about their 3D imaging, or they are building a model to replicate the home, etc. First and foremost, what a waste of state money and resources, and secondarily, not replacing the real thing. Jurors are notoriously unpredictable, and they tend to make decisions on a variety of facts and circumstances. It would be foolish of us to try and foresee what they will want or need or make to justify a verdict in this case. And you know, that is a very powerful statement from the family, and I agree with them. I cannot say that, and I know that there's another family. I mean, Ethan's family is okay with it. Make it happen. It's okay. Okay? But there's other families that aren't. And so I think it's the district attorney's responsibility to stop it. Just say, you know what, just to make sure, let's just put a hold on this thing and just stop it. Okay. And, as I used to say, stop the madness, because here's something to consider. Okay. And Dr. Brucato, you can go into much more depth in this, but rest assured, and this is what I've put up here on the screen here, something to consider. Rest assured, if the house at 1122 King Road comes down, it will be the ultimate fantasy coming true for Bryan Kohberger if convicted. Right now, he is sitting in jail, potentially with access to the internet, to iPad devices, to the news, and maybe he has access to YouTube where he's watching this particular program. Okay? He will hold the final moments and memories locked into his mind as a trophy, knowing the horror he inflicted. He decided who lived and died, and now will be able to add another chapter to his evil intentions, that he and only he will have the sights and sounds locked away from the world and controlled by his memory. No one will really ever know it. No one will really ever know the reality. It will be his and only his forever. Gary, you mentioned that the other day. Expound on your thought process.
Well, I think that if we're one of these people that sort of thinks of these events as being nothing more than a mass murder, committed by an angry person or whatever, then, the site that it occurred, in a way, might even be incidental. But if we understand that this person is a fantasy-oriented, perverse, angry person who is trying to level the playing field and assert complete dominance and control over others, particularly the victims, then the site that was chosen is extremely important. It would be extremely important to him to pull the strings in every aspect of the story. And by tearing the house down, unfortunately, what you do is you sort of perma-seal it as a kind of a fantasy object that's now completely his. It's gone. He may, get away with things. There may be things that happened in the house that no one will ever know but him. And it's like a way of symbolically sweeping away the victims in exactly the way that an offender like that would want to, because it would be a way of saying, I'm not the insignificant one, you're the insignificant one, and every trace of you is gone. And that's very sad to think about. But unfortunately, in some perverse way, you would expect an offender like that to think, and also it takes the domination that the person had over the house itself and makes the story end that way, right? I may have been looking through the windows. I may have been up in the trees. I may have known every inch of that house, and it's mine. And now it's gone, and it dies mine. And got boarded up. No one will ever be there again. And it's all mine. Incidentally, this is the kind of offender, if he's guilty but he gets freed, he'll go back to where that house was and relive. And remember, yeah, and he'll say, "Oh, I know what went up, what happened right over there. I know what happened right over there." And that's the kind of thing you want to say. Is that there's this unfortunate feeding in to that fantasy of bringing the place down and having complete control over it, wiping it off the map, that I think is right in line with exactly the hostility they would have had. But in fact, I'd bet my life that if he could, he'd want to watch the demolition.
Yeah, I was thinking that too. If they televise it, and I'll bet you he's already signed up for TV time.
It would feel very powerful to him.
Absolutely, and he would relive. I mean, he would relive every single second, wouldn't he, Doc?
Yes, exactly.
So this is that's why the psychology is tied into this home. Don't do it yet. If it needs to come down at some point, tear it down. But wait until justice has been had. Wait.
But Chris, somebody in the audience asked a very interesting question they're asking us to answer.
Okay, what's the question?
The question is that to ask ourselves, is there any party that benefits from tearing it down?
I'll let you answer first.
I want you to. But in other words, can you think of any party that would benefit, that would justify it?
I can think of, at the conclusion of the trial, who would benefit. The community would benefit. The families would benefit because hopefully justice was done, and now the healing process can begin. If it's torn down before, the beneficiaries would be Bryan Kohberger and the defense team, because there is going to be that one potential, which you never know, that one juror who is going to listen to things like that, and i.e. if they find that guy, which they will, I know they will. And he goes, when I used to walk up and down those stairs, and by the way, they'll be called as a rebuttal witness after the two survivors have testified, because those are the only two survivors. The two survivors are the only two witnesses that have insight into the sights and the sounds and the smells that evening, because the other four victims cannot speak for themselves. It's the state's responsibility and the law enforcement's responsibility to speak for those victims and the families of these victims. They are the advocates for the family. The state represents those four victims. And so they should err on the side of caution, knowing that it's a what if. Even if it's 1%, and we mentioned this on our last program, Gary, even if it's 1%, that 1% is too dangerous in a case like this. In a case like this. So I think the defense and BK will benefit if they tear it down prior to a trial. And if they wait, then the community, the families, and the district attorney will benefit. That's my opinion. What say you?
Well, I think that's very interesting. And I also think that there are people who might wonder about, is there some kind of windfall that comes along with donations and so forth, where it starts getting complicated because there are other reasons why, this has to be done. I mean, are there donors? Are there other? I mean, I don't know, Chris. I mean, it sounded like before when you were kind of going through statements that there was a very large amount of money involved in the house at this point. I mean, I don't mean that to cast aspersions. I just think it's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, they're trying to heal, and everybody understands that, right? Here's the website for the university, which I love the people and I love the university. Don't get me wrong, but I also know that victims need advocates, and the advocates should be speaking out here on behalf of the family. They should be going to the university and saying, "Look, it's great that we've raised all this money. It's a wonderful project to have the healing garden and the memorial." Okay. But two things have happened here. They tied it into the sad, and I'm going to quote, "The sad reality is that we lose students each year to a variety of causes." What? I mean, okay, yeah, that's a sad reality. We get it. But in this case, you lost Xana, Ethan, Madison, and Kaylee. And that's why you have this website up in terms of this memorial. They should be the primary focus. And this is, I think, where it's gotten confused here for, whoever. And I don't, I'm not blaming or casting dispersion. I'm just pointing out what reality is. This is their website and this is their fundraiser for a memorial park that started with, unfortunately, the horrible tragedy and horror that these four, don't have a voice. They don't have a voice. And we have a voice. This platform has a voice. I've got, 42 years of experience in this game. And this is one of these cases where you don't want to take a chance. That 1% could end it for you in a single day.
Well, I suppose that the counter argument would be that the enormous amount of money raised would speak to the desire people have to eliminate the house and have this kind of I mean, it's absolutely impossible for us to say. We're not in the minds of these, but it is interesting that, you have you have so much debate over it, and it seems like such a no-brainer from a legal perspective. It really does boggle the mind. And I think that person's question, about the motive and about who benefits was a really interesting one, because you kind of can't really think of an answer of why you could wait some months. It's a little peculiar.
Yeah, I
can't think of a reason.
I love this comment. Build the memorial and keep that house. Okay, that is a great idea, Nancy. They can build the memorial and keep the house. And at the conclusion of the trial, whatever it is, guilty or not guilty, then they can tear it down. Make it go away if they feel like it. But you can't. There is no substitute. There's no substitute. And trust me, I can't tell you how many rooms I have sat in with a deceased individual in that room and listened to the sounds, the smell, the lights, and try to put myself into the thought process just before that poor victim was taken off of this earth. Now, mind you, a jury only gets to go see the sanitized version of what that was like, and that the photographs and everything. But a spatial correlation becomes very relevant to some jurors. When they walk up steps and they hear creak, 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 creak. When they walk into a room and the bailiff's standing off into a corner and a juror walks over and hits the light switch and the light comes on and they go, and they write in their notepad, okay? We don't know what they're thinking, but we know they're trying to relive what these four young adults went through. And I don't care how much technology you have. I mean, we all watched, at least I did, the Apollo 11 land on the moon, and everybody at home went, wow. Okay. But I also went to hear Neil Armstrong talk about what it was like to be there. Okay. And, that whole patch, if you look at the Apollo 11 patch, do you know not one astronaut's name's on that patch? Because it was for the nation. Not one investigator, not one DA, not one FBI agent, not one anybody in law enforcement should be giving advice for a jury until it's concluded. That's way too much confidence into a trial like this. Evident of the fact that we're starting to see it play out in Murdoch with other things happening. But when the jurors went to that scene, okay, they said what they said. This was really important. Was this in leaving the sheath causing DNA doubts? Is this entire process an experiment?
Right. Well,
yeah.
You need to experience things firsthand to the best degree possible to really grasp what went on. It reminds me of when Kaufman, the author of the book American Brutus, about John Wilkes Booth, wanted to really understand what happened at Ford's Theater, the night of the Lincoln assassination. And so to complete the experience, to put himself into the shoes of Booth to understand it, he literally leapt from the balcony at risk of life and limb because that had happened to Booth, or that he had jumped from the balcony. It's an extraordinary thing. But in doing that, he was able to really understand what the heck that would have felt like, and why, and what kind of mindset a person would have to be into, how he wound up breaking his leg, and all of that, right? And so sometimes to seek the truth, you have to go to these kind of measures. You have to put yourself fully, submerge oneself into the sensory experience, of the house. But I really appreciate the sensitivity to this issue. It almost is like a passion that you have about this, Chris. I think it's a wonderful thing, and I'm sure it means something to family members and so forth, because what it really is a passion for justice, but also like the humanity of the victims. And that's really that, and that's so important, because I think that's what seems to be upsetting you, is that it almost comes across like an insensitivity.
Yeah, and I think I'm oversensitive to it because obviously, as you know, I lost my son. And if this was me, 20 years later, and this, horrific event in my family had occurred, I mean, I would be on this soapbox 24/7, 365 saying, stop the madness. Okay. And to answer Muddy Paws, can't law enforcement seize the house of evidence? That is a great comment. And yes, they did. They had it. They seized it. And then they relinquished it. But yes, they could have held it. They could have held it for as long as they want. In fact, what they could have done is they could have even put it into the evidence, just make it an item number. 1122, item number 3, whatever it is, 34. One house, and it doesn't move. And you keep the chain link around it, and you keep somebody there until the trial is over. But yeah, I think your observation, Gary, about me, I think, as you know, is right on target. I am passionate for victims because, I get it. I've not only experienced having to be on the opposite side of being that investigator and that responsibility and the weight that comes with it, but at the same time, trying to have empathy for, the system itself and the families, and quite frankly, for the cause that it works correctly. I mean, Kohberger has a family too, and they want it to work correctly. And the jury hasn't even been picked, and those are his jurors. They belong to him, and they're divided up by the state and the defense picking them. But quite frankly, they belong to Kohberger because they decide his fate. And if at any time during that jury, just one person says, "You know what I want to do? I'd like to go see that," and they write that note to the judge. And that judge then has to put it before the defense and the prosecution saying, "Hey, juror number 4 wants to go to the crime scene. What say you?" And then they have to argue in chambers, with the judge and determine whether or not that's even a viable position. If the house is there today, meaning during the trial, the judge can make a determination of whether or not it's viable. Okay. And if the jurors persist, they have to go. The court can't overrule the jury. Okay. It becomes a security issue at that point, meaning who's going to guard them, what buses are necessary, and all of that stuff. But in reality, that those individuals they determine whether or not they go out there. It's the prosecution in this has already determined there should be no. I would submit to you, the prosecutor has already determined there should be no jury view, and it's okay. And I'll bet you it was driven by a conversation with the university, probably through all their attorneys, and somebody got the win that says, you know what? Okay, they're good with it, so let's make it happen. Let's make it go away. Okay, let's make it go away. I love Jim Bond's comment here. They didn't tear down Ford this year. Thank goodness. And you can find his chair also in the museum in Michigan at what's the big museum there in Dearborn. But anyway, Lincoln's chair is in there. They didn't destroy it. Here's a question for you, Doc. Is it possible the suspect is criminally insane?
No. There is not one shred of an individual that was disorganized, deluded. No, every sign here points to an individual who, because remember, criminally insane means you knew the difference between right and wrong. Here, every sign points to an individual who had a kind of a forethought, schemed, plotted, went in a calculated way, took steps to conceal evidence. Those are not the behaviors of a person who's criminally insane. Criminally insane has nothing to do with, do you have mental illness? It has to do with, do you have mental illness to the point that you no longer appreciate the difference between right and wrong? And there can be no, I think, real argument here that whoever committed these murders was criminally insane. I also don't think that there's any clear evidence this is a person who potentially suffered from that kind of severity of mental illness. It is true that there are some things that were described in biographical, autobiographical writings that speak to indications of dysphoric mood, depersonalization, desensitization to the world, feeling kind of isolated, etc. But we have no evidence of a diagnosable severe mental illness. So, I think it's important to kind of bear that in mind. But I'm sure that'll be borne out, at the time. We'll learn, that someone went in, I hope, and kind of explored the state of mind and all of that. But remember that the vast majority of people who commit offenses like this, mass murder or the type that goes on to commit serial killing, are not really severely mentally ill. That's just a fragment. In the serial killing world, it's virtually non-existent. The serial killer database at Radford, Florida Gulf Coast, tells us that 0.06% of serial killers have psychosis with severe mental illness. And when it comes to mass murder, you're looking at rates that are somewhere between like 8 and 12%, depending upon the weapon used. So the vast majority of these people are not severely mentally ill. If you were a betting person, you would bet that a person who committed this offense would not be. You would lean towards oddness and some interpersonal troubles, but that can be consistent with a personality problem, not serious mental illness, right? So that's something that you want to kind of bear in mind. So no, I the quick answer to that is no. There's not one drop of proof. Although let's let someone do an examination and come to his or her own determination.
So a question here is: has the house been cleaned by a crime scene cleanup crew? I don't know the answer to that. And if it has, then you're good to go. You can bring not only a jury in there, you can bring, anybody in that house. They can bring anybody into it. And because they make sure that they clean all that biohazard. There's a lot of chemicals. And by the way, those chemicals that they utilize, they're designed to clean crime scenes, i.e., once they clean the crime scene, you could move back into that house. It's not an environmental impact. You got to wear a hazmat suit anymore. That's why they have these companies. Back in the day, they didn't have those companies. The families would have been left up. If it was a situation in their own home, the families were left to clean those houses. These companies are a phenomenon within the last 15 years that have appeared to clean up this hazmat stuff. So as a result of that, there's hundreds and hundreds of crime scenes around this country where families move back in. Look at a suicide. They don't tear the house down. If somebody kills themselves in a bathroom, if they shoot themselves in a bathtub or cut their wrist, they don't tear the house down. They have a company come in, clean it up, and unfortunately, the only thing that's left is those horrible memories to that family and the impact of it. It's the same way here. Once the house is gone after the trial, that memorial will be a godsend. It'll be an amazing thing. But you can bet everybody that... Go ahead, Gary. I'm sorry.
I just want to clarify something that's bothering me. am maybe I'm misunderstanding, but is it possible? I think so, but I want to hear you say so because you're somebody with an investigative background. Is it possible to go into a house and find evidence that there had been blood somewhere, but that it was removed, washed away, etc.? Trace evidence of where blood may have been, that someone made an attempt to conceal or clean up?
Yes, I mean, there are chemicals that can be used. One of them is a chemical called Blue Star, and you can spray Blue Star, and then you have to use a certain pair of glasses and/or what we call an alternate light source, an ALS, and you'll get a blue illumination like behind me. And that's why I got these blue lights back there to kind of represent that. This is exactly what it would look like. It would glow, but it's the enzymes that's glowing. So if it's blood, but a lot of things glow. It could be bleach. It could be soda. There's a lot of things, and that's why they photograph it, okay, with special photography, and then they can take a swab. So 100 years later, if you know where to look, you could pull a board up, and remember, blood seeks, goes to its lowest
I
point.
told you that happened in the Lizzie Borden house. They found evidence that there have been, which would suggest that a cleanup, because there was blood someplace you wouldn't expect it. So as I understood it. So then the question becomes, did anyone look at that? Because I'm sorry, I still can't get my mind around that the witness who sees him with with that outfit on and the whole thing doesn't describe him as being absolutely covered in blood. I don't understand how he could not be covered in blood. It doesn't make any sense. Where is all of that? Where did he clean up? I mean, I don't mean to be graphic. I'm just saying from a logic perspective, it makes absolutely no sense. I mean, wouldn't he have been covered pretty much all over with blood cast off and so forth? Or did he wear some kind of thing to like a smock or something?
I think it would be safe to say that there would be cast off on him, evident of the fact that I think we'll discover that they took pieces of the wall, et cetera, from that problem, cast off. And also the other chemical you can use is called luminol. But
I'm very familiar with it. Yeah.
Okay, and so you would expect most definitely that there is going to be a cross-contamination of blood from all the victims, all four of them. Okay? And that in of itself, to your point, now, and if we think about it, do we know if there's a bloody footprint out in front of the doorway as he's leaving? So that means he's not only has it on him, for sure he has it on his shoes, and then for sure that would tell us, okay, then there's cast off on him. So does he pause, to your point? Does he pause at the conclusion of this and go into one of the bathrooms? And this is why we used to take the drains. And I'm assured they did it. We used to take the drain out of the tub, and we take the drain out of the sink. Okay, or you can take a long swab and put it down into that drain and go like that all the way up. And now you have, if you find any forensic evidence on that. Right. But when he gets outside, does he, does the snow make it go away? Water, et cetera. I don't know. I don't have the answers to that, right, for him. But I can tell you this: when he got home, if in fact that he went home first, right? We don't know if he actually went home that night, do we? I mean, everybody says, yeah, he was, he lives at this apartment, but we don't know the totality of his
right. And if the neighbor heard him cleaning up anything that evening, but it's also interesting, Chris, because even if you would expect even a droplet or something to come off the pants or off the shirt or whatever, that would give us some clue the way that the offender moved through the house. That would help us understand the order, for example, how he entered, how he exited, how he, but my understanding is not even in the car is there any, like, in other words,
well,
how is there a complete
that one's hard. That one's not hard, because if he's already planned this out, which it sounds like he methodically has. I mean, right down to the point where he's wearing gloves at his family house. Okay. So one has to presuppose he had to have that consciousness of guilt and initially to prepare the car, prepare everything prior to the attack.
So you're picturing that whoever did this would have covered the seats and so forth with some kind of disposable
It could be.
plastic or sheets or something.
It could be.
They would have gone in with that kind of
Yeah.
that stuff. And the idea is that after the offense, where does all that stuff go? Because the witnesses don't say they see him carrying plastic or anything to be disposed, and it doesn't appear to be anywhere in the house. So where the heck is it?
Well, I'll give you an example, and I'll use another case. Suzanne Morphew, her husband, went to 5 separate dumpsters before going, back to and saying, "Where's my wife?" So we don't know. These guys are very creative, as you know more than anybody. You've interviewed hundreds of them. They come up with all these amazing plots. As look at Ted Bundy with the fake cast, right? And where did his clothing go? After each event? I mean, he's going back. So did he have, like BTK, did he have a kit? Did he have a murder kit? Those are the kind of things that if Kohberger's leaning that way and he's headed that way, which, in your assessment, that's, if we let this guy out, he's not going to be selling cookies, to the neighborhood at any point. Right. But at some point, if he had thought through the fact that he wants to wear gloves post-incident, the fact that he bought a K-bar, if in fact that's reality, i.e., innocent till proven guilty. But if he went through all those steps, I don't know. Do we have any receipts of him purchasing, variety? I know they got him purchasing clothes. They've got him. I mean, is there plastic? Is there a whole bunch of other things? I had a case one time where it was a drug hit, and they literally, right out of the movies, put him down on his knees and put the plastic out, capped him in the back of the head and rolled him up and then duct taped him, okay? And took him back and threw him in a dumpster behind a Ralph's supermarket. Oh. Okay. And this is a funny story too, by the way. We went up to Long Beach to interview because we were able to trace him up there. And one of this gal walks in where we're at, and this was a long time ago, by the way. I'm not going to date myself. But this gal walks in, and my partner, his name is Mike Peretta, it was his case. This gal walks in, and he says, "Hey, Mike, hey, Chris, get this girl's horsepower." And I said, "Hey, ma'am, do you have an ID?" And she goes, "Yes," and hands me the ID. And I'm, putting it in my notebook. And she looks at me, she stops me. She goes, "You don't know me, do you?" And I said, "Should I?" She goes, "Yes, I'm on a TV show." I said, "Okay, whatever." And I'm writing her name down. You know who it was? It was Lisa. It was Lisa Kudrow.
Oh, the actress from Friends.
Yeah, from Friends. I didn't even know who she was because this was early on, right? And I was like, "Yeah, okay, whatever." How did you know this guy? Essentially, that's what it came out to. And anyway, I took her statement and handed it off into the package. But these are the kind of things they go through all of this process, right, to dump him in the back of a dumpster at Ralph's supermarket. So that was the body. Can you imagine this? Where his process, his thinking. You tell me, his thinking is so methodical and so by the minute. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me, evident of the fact that he kept driving around multiple times.
And then to have it not go as planned.
Right.
One thing I want to ask you about, you'll know far better than I will on this, that has always bothered me, and I've never asked the question out loud, but it's always buzzing around in my head, is how did the dog not go ballistic at the smell of blood? All the blood that would have been in that house. You ever see a dog around blood?
I've seen dogs. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, how it doesn't make sense. I can't wrap my head around that, or even the noise, or the screaming, or anything else that we would have expected. Why would I mean, if there was that much blood in that house, wouldn't the dog have been going crazy?
Well, I think the dog would have been going crazy to protect, you know.
Right, that too, of course. But the dog was locked in a room, right? Closed in a room.
Yeah, I don't know I don't know exactly where the dog was, to be honest with you.
I
But
understand it was closed in a room in a way that was not characteristic of the way they would have kept the dog.
well,
I think the dog used to sleep with the girls, it's odd. Somebody seems to have put him in there, but wouldn't he have been pawing and scratching and kind of, I mean, at
you
the
would think.
sounds, and it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, you would think, and I've always said that Murphy's going to be the biggest witness in this case if they find some forensics with dog hair on it. They can do DNA on the dog too. They can pull his hair. And
I mean, I know people said the dog was just a quiet dog. He wasn't the type that barked or whatever.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
there were enough things going on there that would have introduced smells and sounds that I think, I mean, if you know anything about dogs, I mean, you know how a dog would act from that.
Mhm.
It doesn't make any sense. I mean, you're a dog owner, right?
Yeah.
Do you think the dog, Buddy, your dog is locked in a room, right? Which is uncharacteristic for it to be put in the room. And all that commotion's going on, and there are odors and things that the dog would almost certainly pick up. Wouldn't the dog be doing something other than just sitting there?
I think so. Yeah, I think he would sense the danger too.
I never understood it. I mean, it almost makes me wonder, did he ever meet Kohberger?
That is a great question. I
Was
don't
he
know.
familiar with him in some way? Had he gone into the house and fed him treats or something? I mean, how did he get him? How was he comfortable around? I don't understand it. It baffles me. And those things, talk about Columbo. Those are the kinds of things that can keep a person up all night, because it just, like Columbo would say, it doesn't make sense. Right?
And in the affidavit when they did a search warrant on it, I think the return does say animal hair, but it doesn't describe it specifically as dog hair. To elevate, that's a great observation, and thank you for pointing that out. But if it is dog hair and they do have enough, they can DNA connect it back to Murphy, and if so, he's toast because that puts him in the room.
I just think it's a really
on
interesting
top of the
question.
DNA.
I think it's an interesting question, because it's like, the dog that didn't bark in the night kind of a thing, right? That
Mhm.
also came up, of course, in the Summer Wells case.
Yes.
Right. So it's
Yeah.
just interesting, and then somebody asked in the audience here, was the dog drugged?
That's a great question. Here it is. Yeah. What was the dog scared? It depends on the breed, right? If that dog that was, and by the way, this is another thing that's bothered me about this case, Gary, is the dog that was skinned within a mile of that house.
Right.
I mean, prior to the incident,
Yeah.
the cops have put a kibosh on that case because we tried to FOIA the reports and they won't release them.
Mm.
So I don't know what's going on with that. But that will be very interesting because, if in fact he was testing out that knife and making it very efficient, then who knows? But those are the kind of things that we found disturbing when this thing first started going down, even from the get-go.
Right. But there was an animal strand taken from, wasn't it in Kohberger's home?
I think,
animal hair, and there was some speculation that it may have come from Kaylee's dog.
Yeah, we don't know.
Oh no,
right.
But I think that would be extremely damning if there was. I mean, you know what I'm saying? I mean, that should be pretty straightforward. I don't know how you'd get around that one. I mean, there in terms of the damning nature of evidence.
Mm-hmm.
But it's an interesting question about, was the dog used to him, used to his smell, used to having him around? Had he been there?
Well, if that house is open to a lot of people and that dog was extremely friendly, you
like immune to noise and so forth, even the smell of blood.
Well, I can't answer that one, but I'd have to Well, I'd have to defer that to my colleagues. I can only tell you what my dog did. This guy up on the wall, that guy right over there. That's Irk right there. That's Irk. We used to call him Irk the Jerk. Let me put this on him. Let me see. Oops. I just knocked your book off, Gary. Anyway, I don't know if you can see it, but that picture right there, that was Irk. And when he got blood, he was trained, keep going, man. Keep going. So, those kind of dogs, obviously, police dogs, i.e. service dogs, they love blood. Absolutely love it. But a regular domestic dog, I don't know. I don't know how Murphy would respond, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
So that one's above my pay grade.
It's just one of those things, it just kind of, that and the question of where all the blood went, where the blood was when, that nobody seems to have seen, on him or whatever, if he's guilty. So those are things that, kind of keep you up thinking about the case. It doesn't quite make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But anyway, so.
Okay. So we are 2 hours exactly as promised. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to give you the last word, Dr. Brucato. And folks, if you have not gotten his book yet for Christmas or even after Christmas,
more like a book you'd read at Halloween than a book you'd read at Christmas time, but perhaps the backdrop of Christmas with its beautiful, hopeful message will help get through the book.
Read it at Halloween.
Yeah, well, because
read it 24/7.
Yeah, Halloween is about facing the darkness, in the world and people, right? So that's might be more appropriate.
And those of you that have had it, have you written a review on it? Please give them a positive review. That
if you mean it,
it'd be great.
If you mean it, don't give a positive review if you don't mean it.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, Dr. Brucato, as always, I can't thank you enough for all of your time. Merry Christmas to you. And I know you're going to visit some family, right?
I am indeed.
Okay. And
more important than that.
And you shot over after seeing clients today to come to the interview room. And I am just so grateful for your friendship. And I know there's a lot of great things around the horizon coming. So I'm excited for 2024. And by the way, everybody, I've asked Gary, are you okay with, how much time and he's like, oh, I'm loving this. And so, you're going to see a lot more of him into 2024. We've got so much more coming on the horizon. I don't know about you guys, but I absolutely love his spirit and his heart. And he is just such a good human being. And he does so much good for so many. And I showed him the other day, it was 2009 where I had a chance to meet Dr. Stone for the very first time. I believe heard Kay playing with Murphy. That was Murphy freaking out, Dr. B. I can't afford the many characters, so I elaborated in a direct message. Thank you, Micro. Okay, that makes sense. But anyway, my brief crossing with him was literally that, probably less than an hour. But Dr. Brucato had the luxury and the privilege and the honor to be mentored and friends, co-author with Dr. Michael Stone, who just passed. So I'm going to give Dr. Brucato the final word here, and then we're going to go to Hawaii. So, Gary, it is all yours, my friend.
Well, I just want to express my appreciation to Chris for inviting me so much, and for the audience that seems to have such a positive reaction to never, for whatever reason, to get sick of the drone of my voice and the ideas that I have. And so I really appreciate that very much. I'm very fortunate to have friends like Chris and many others in my life. That is a great blessing. One of my favorite movies to watch at this time of year is the movie It's a Wonderful Life. And of course, for anybody who doesn't know it, it's about a man who's gotten into a kind of a financial mess because he's being framed by a competitor in the banking business. And he doesn't want to be alive anymore. He thinks he's done nothing but bad in the world, And an angel named Clarence, during the process of trying to earn his wings, takes George, that's the central character, under his wing, so to speak, and basically shows him what the world would be like if he had never been born. And it's pretty sad stuff. And then at the end of the movie, it's a very beautiful, moving scene where all these friends coming together to kind of pull him out of the tragedy, the tragic financial situation he's gotten himself into. And he gets a note in a book from Clarence. And it says, "Remember, George, no man is a failure who has friends." And that point is so central to this Kohberger story, because if Kohberger is guilty, remember that one of the things that figured into the narrative is that no matter what he tried, he just couldn't make a friend. There were people who respected him and liked him, but this was a lonely, pathetic kind of a character that blamed everyone else for the inability to form a connection. That's what it looks like. And so you don't realize how much you accomplish by being a friend to people. You never know what's brooding in a mind and what isolation does to a person, and how a person can get lost in the darkness. And, it's important to go out and be a friend instead of brooding on no one likes me. Go out and like someone. Go out and be a friend to someone. And you'll find that that's really all you have in life, is the good that you do. Because there's another point that's made in that beautiful movie, It's a Wonderful Life, written on below a portrait of the Bailey patriarch, played by the actor Samuel Hines. And it says, "All you can take with you is that which you give away." And that's a very important thing to remember. And so I've tried to live my life giving away my time like water, to things like this and to victims, because I feel that ultimately the most valuable thing in the whole world is time. A person's salvation can take 1 second. A person can come to a realization. A person could make a left turn instead of a right turn and be or not be in a car accident. Fates could be decided on 1 second. And so those strings of time that we give away like water is the most generous thing we can give away. And so at this holiday season and at times of giving, remember, giving time away and loving people is really the most important, powerful thing you can do. And it may even save lives. If somebody is suicidal or having thoughts of violence, having somebody care about you can make all the difference. So go out and be a friend. And I'm grateful for the ones I have and grateful for all of you. Good night.
Hard working every day, I'm stressed out 24/7, babe. No timeouts, wish we could fly away. You and I go to our favorite place. Oh yeah, make special memories together. I'll be your company now and forever. I say we fly away, you and me, go to our favorite place. Feeling the sun on my face in Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. I need a summer breeze, some fresh air to put my mind at ease. No cares. You wanna come with me? Me and you go to our favorite tree. Are you ready now? We jump on a plane now. We're taking away. Yeah, we're taking away. Don't hesitate now. We're taking away. Yeah, we're taking away. We'll never come down. We're going away.